You know that feeling? That deep, sinking realization that you are the joke, the afterthought, the person no one in your own family takes seriously? That was me, April, at my grandfather George Thompson's will reading. It was supposed to be a solemn occasion, a final tribute to the man who built an empire from nothing. But instead it turned into the most humiliating day of my life. We were all crammed into the downtown office of Mr. Sterling, Grandpa's longtime estate attorney. The room itself reeked of old money, mahogany walls, leather chairs, and a giant picture window overlooking the Willamette River in Portland. My mother, Eleanor, sat ramrod straight in her designer black dress, constantly dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. She wasn't grieving, she was performing. My father, William, kept tapping the face of his watch, his impatience barely concealed. He had run the family shipping business, Thompson Maritime, for the last decade, and he was already mentally tallying up his prize. Then there was my brother, Blake, leaning back like he already owned the entire city, texting furiously, and my cousin Samantha, whispering dollar signs to her husband about the worth of Grandpa's art collection. They were vultures circling a carcass, and I hated that I was sitting among them. I, however, was quietly heartbroken. Grandpa George had always been my person. He taught me to play chess when I was 10, patiently explaining that life, like the board, required you to think 7 moves ahead. He took me sailing on the Columbia, sharing wild stories about building his first shipyard. While they were busy chasing luxury, I was the one who actually listened to him, who helped him research market positioning and customer service strategies when I visited him in the summer. I genuinely thought I mattered. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, the sound sharp and formal, silencing the room. He began to read, listing names and staggering sums that just kept growing. To my son, William Thompson, I bequeathed Thompson Maritime and all associated assets, totaling an estimated $40 million. Dad's usually stern face cracked into a triumphant smile. He deserved it, he thought. He had managed the business. To my daughter-in-law, Eleanor Thompson, I leave the family estate in Napa Valley, including the vineyard and all furnishings, valued at $27 million. Mom actually let out a small, satisfied gasp. The performance was over. The reward was secured. To my grandson, Blake Thompson, I leave my collection of vintage automobiles and the penthouse apartment in Manhattan. Blake finally looked up, flashing a smug grin and giving a subtle, under-the-table fist pump. Those cars alone were worth millions. And to my granddaughter, Samantha Davis, I leave the yacht Isabella and the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard. Samantha squeezed her husband's hand hard, her eyes glittering with victory. Now it was my turn. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Grandpa and I had been the closest. Surely he'd left me something that honored our bond, something significant. Mr. Sterling paused, adjusting his reading glasses, and looked straight at me. Every eye in the room followed his gaze. To my granddaughter, April Thompson, he continued, his voice absolutely devoid of emotion, I leave this envelope. That was it, an envelope. The room didn't just fall silent. It exploded in a wave of uncomfortable, then openly mocking laughter. My own mother chuckled, a dry, condescending sound, and patted my knee. "Oh, honey," she said, not even trying to hide her amusement. "I'm sure it's a nice little keepsake. Maybe a letter with some wisdom for your classroom." Blake leaned over, that familiar sneer plastered on his face. "Maybe it's a gift certificate for a new blazer, sis. Fits your budget." The words cut deeper than any knife. It wasn't about the money, it was about the public dismissal. 26 years of being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who tried to help, only to be branded the family failure, the one who got nothing while everyone else walked away with millions. Samantha piped up, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Don't look so down, April. I'm sure Grandpa left you something appropriate for your station." She meant, "You're a teacher. You're insignificant." I felt my cheeks burn, but a strange coldness settled in my stomach. I stood up quickly, the leather chair scraping loudly against the floor. "If you'll excuse me," I managed, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I need some air." I walked out, hearing my mother behind me telling Dad, "She's always so dramatic. It's just a nice little trinket, I'm sure." Down in the silent, polished steel elevator, I finally opened the despised envelope. Inside, I found a crisp, first-class plane ticket to Monaco, dated for next week. And beneath the ticket, a single line written in Grandpa George's distinctive, elegant script. "Trust activated on your 26th birthday, sweetheart. Time to claim what's always been yours." It was shocking, yes, but that wasn't the twist that made me gasp. The true shock came from the second item, tucked tightly beneath the handwritten note. It was a business card embossed with gold lettering. "Mr. Julian Vance, Private Wealth Manager, Geneva." On the back, in Grandpa's handwriting, "He's managing your trust. Call him." And attached to the card was a bank statement. The letterhead was for a prestigious, international private bank. The account name read, April R. Thompson Trust, and the balance. I stared at the numbers, counting the zeros again and again, my breath completely stolen. $347 million. $347 million. It had to be a joke, a mistake. But the paper was real, the account number was legitimate, and Grandpa's handwriting, the same hand that had moved my queen across the chessboard, was undeniable. My insignificant envelope had just silenced every single inheritance in that mahogany-paneled room. The chess game had just begun. The elevator doors slid open onto the street, but I barely noticed the rush of downtown Portland traffic. My world, which had felt tiny, humiliating, and defined by a teaching salary just minutes ago, had violently expanded. I walked aimlessly, clutching the envelope like it was a live wire. $347 million. It was a sum so colossal, so detached from my reality, rent checks, student loan payments, budgeting for groceries, that my mind initially rejected it as fake. A cruel, elaborate prank. But the paper felt too real, the business card too substantial. And Grandpa George never did anything without a reason. Everything he taught me, from sailing knots to the Sicilian defense, was about structure, planning, and looking beyond the immediate surface. I had dismissed his conversations about hotel management strategies and market positioning during our chess games as charming eccentricity. Now the phrase practical education echoed in my head. He wasn't just talking, he was training. I didn't go home immediately. I found a quiet coffee shop, ordered the strongest espresso I could find, and spread the contents of the envelope on a small, shaky table. The Monaco ticket, Mr. Julian Vance's card, the bank statement. I had to know the truth before my family's laughter poisoned the entire experience. Back at my tiny apartment that night, I placed an international call to the bank number listed on the statement. It took 3 transfers, 20 minutes of hold music, and providing an almost embarrassing amount of verification data. Finally, a crisp Swiss-German accent, impeccable English, of course, came on the line. "Yes, Miss Thompson, I can confirm your identity and the status of your account." My heart was beating so hard it hurt. Is the balance is $347 million correct? The banker paused, a professional coolness in his voice. That is the current liquid balance, yes. Your trust, the Thompson Global Trust, was established when you were 16 and has been professionally managed for the past decade, generating substantial returns and reinvesting profits from various international business holdings. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Not a joke, not a mistake, real. But I never signed anything to create a trust. I didn't even know it existed, I stammered. Your grandfather established it as the settler, Miss Thompson. As a minor, your direct consent was not required. The trust was structured as a blind trust, with a release clause tied precisely to your 26th birthday, as dictated in the original documents. A blind trust. He had hidden my entire future from me, from the world, and most importantly, from the very people who thought they knew everything about me. What kind of business holdings are we talking about? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I could picture Grandpa, the king in his shipping empire, moving pieces on a global scale I couldn't comprehend. I am not authorized to discuss specifics over the phone, Miss Thompson. However, Mr. Julian Vance, who manages the most sensitive assets, has been fully briefed to provide all details upon your arrival in Monaco. The Principality is where a significant portion of your operational holdings is based. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there, surrounded by my worn furniture and the books I'd graded, feeling utterly disconnected from the world. My phone was vibrating constantly with a family group text. Blake was sharing photos of vintage car magazines. Samantha was excitedly browsing Martha's vineyard real estate listings. Mom had posted a picture of Dad raising a glass of expensive champagne in a toast to the Thompson legacy. Not one of them asked about my envelope. They truly believed I got nothing worth mentioning. I decided right then that I would take the trip, not as a vacation, but as a strategic reconnaissance mission. Grandpa hadn't just left me money. He had left me a plan, a whole hidden architecture of wealth. And the plane ticket was the first instruction. The next morning, at breakfast with my parents, I tested the waters. I'm thinking of taking that trip to Monaco, I said casually, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Dad nearly choked on his bacon. Monaco, April? That's going to cost you thousands in hotels and expenses. Your teaching salary can't handle that kind of trip. He worried about my budget, not about me. The ticket is first class, and it's all paid for, I replied, trying to suppress the smile. Mom scoffed, setting down her fork. Sweetie, Monaco is for international people, people with real money. You'll be completely out of place. It's all yacht parties and high rollers. I felt that familiar burn of embarrassment, but now it was tempered by immense knowledge. They thought I'd be out of place. They had no idea I was likely the single largest asset manager in that tiny country. The power of that secret was intoxicating. Maybe I'll get some good Instagram photos, I said, echoing a typical, dismissive comment they would expect. Yes, show your students what real wealth looks like before you come back to your little classroom. Blake sneered from across the table. I just nodded, tucking the memory of their words away. I knew now what Grandpa had meant about seeing their true colors. He didn't want me to be hurt. He wanted me to be prepared. He wanted me to understand who I was dealing with before I held all the cards. The game was set. Tomorrow, I was flying to the French Riviera to claim my destiny, armed with nothing but a first-class ticket and a multi-million-dollar secret. The final 24 hours before my flight were a blur of secrecy and preparation. I called in sick to work, citing a sudden family emergency, which technically was true. I spent hours researching Mr. Julian Vance. The information I found was sparse but consistent. He was not a prince, but a highly respected Swiss-based private wealth manager, known for handling assets for high-net-worth families and global royalty. According to financial publications, his firm managed billions in complex international investments. I was apparently one of those families now. I bought new luggage, nothing flashy, but certainly an upgrade for my battered teacher's suitcase. I updated my wardrobe, choosing pieces that looked professional and polished, suitable for meeting a banker who managed casinos and resorts. I was dressing for the role I was about to claim, shedding the invisibility cloak of the humble teacher. Mom called one last time that evening, trying to talk me out of it. "April, you're making a mistake. You could sell the ticket and put the money towards a down payment on a decent condo." "The ticket's non-refundable, Mom," I replied, reciting the excuse they'd expect. "Well then, at least promise me you won't embarrass yourself. Don't tell people you're a Thompson and expect special treatment. You know how those European types are." I hung up without promising anything. As I double-checked my documents, passport, the bank statement, and Julian Vance's card, I looked at my reflection. 26 years old, brown hair, average height, utterly unremarkable according to my family. But Grandpa had seen something different. He always told me I had his business instincts, his determination, and his eye for a strategic play. Tomorrow I would know if he was right. The first-class cabin on the flight to Nice, the closest major airport to Monaco, was a different universe. The flight attendant addressed me as Miss Thompson, with genuine warmth, offering champagne and fine dining. For 11 hours, I sat in a spacious pod, contemplating the enormity of the number, $1.2 billion. It wasn't just money, it was freedom, security, and a terrifying amount of responsibility. At the Nice airport, I fully expected to struggle with French taxis and navigate the bus to the Principality. Instead, as I wheeled my modest luggage through customs, I saw him, a man in a crisp, black suit holding a small, discreet sign. It didn't just read, April Thompson. It read, Miss April R. Thompson, beneficiary, Thompson Global Trust. My legs felt instantly weak. This was no ordinary vacation pickup. This was an executive security operation. The driver, polite and formal, loaded my bags into the trunk of a pristine black Mercedes-Benz S-Class. As we glided along the scenic coastal highway towards Monaco, he initiated conversation in a thick French accent. "Is this your first visit to the Principality, Miss Thompson?" "Yes," I managed, my voice slightly breathless. "It's beautiful. His Serene Highness is very much looking forward to meeting you. He has been managing the Monaco Holdings personally for several years now." Monaco Holdings, plural. Monaco announced itself gradually. The famous harbor crammed with yachts that were floating mansions, the Monte Carlo casino gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, and winding streets lined with luxury boutiques. Finally, we approached the top of the hill, the heart of the Principality. Instead of stopping at a hotel, the driver guided the Mercedes through a private, heavily secured gate and into a courtyard I'd only ever seen pictured in high society magazines. The driver opened my door. "Miss Thompson, if you would follow me." We walked through hushed, opulent corridors lined with artwork that surely belonged in a museum. My teaching salary had never prepared me for spaces that whispered of centuries of power and influence. Finally, We stopped outside an ornate oak door. The driver knocked twice, opened it, and announced, "Miss Thompson, your appointment." I stepped into an office that dwarfed my entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the Mediterranean. Behind a massive antique desk sat the man from the business card, Julian Vance. He rose as I entered, a tall figure in a perfectly tailored suit, exuding the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself. "Miss Thompson," he said, extending his hand, his accent subtle and cultivated, not royal, but definitely elite. "I am Julian Vance. Thank you for coming." I shook his hand, acutely aware of how out of place I must look. "Mr. Vance, I have so many questions." He smiled warmly, the first genuine warmth I'd felt from anyone outside of Grandpa in weeks. "Please call me Julian, and I have many answers. Your grandfather was not only a dear friend, but one of the most strategic investors I've ever known." He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Miss Thompson, your grandfather began planning your financial future when you were still a child. He established the Thompson Global Trust when you were 16 with very specific instructions regarding your education, both formal and practical. Practical education. All those conversations about business strategy, reading people, and thinking ahead, it flooded back to me. He hadn't been sharing stories. He had been training me." Julian opened a thick folder on his desk, the first of many documents. "Your trust currently holds controlling interests in several major properties. The Monte Carlo Bay Resort and Casino, which generates approximately $40 million annually. The Belmont Grand Casino and Resort in Las Vegas, producing roughly $145 million per year. And commercial real estate portfolios in London, Tokyo, and Sydney." I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. I owned a casino in Las Vegas? A billion-dollar operation? I had to physically grip the arms of my chair to prevent myself from falling over. "Your grandfather also made sure all tax obligations were managed impeccably through the trust structure," Julian continued calmly, as if discussing the weather. "You've been receiving a modest stipend of $60,000 annually, enough to live comfortably as a teacher, but not enough to attract attention. That money in your savings account? It was distributed from your trust, though you were completely unaware of the source." Everything clicked. Why I never stressed about money like my teaching colleagues did. Why my apartment rent never felt crushing. Why Grandpa had always seemed so confident in my future. "Julian," I asked, my voice trembling but suddenly firm, How much am I actually worth?" He consulted another document, looking at me with a respectful gaze. "As of this morning, April, the trust's net asset value is approximately $1.35 billion. I was a billionaire. I had always been one. And nobody, least of all my laughing, condescending family, had any idea. The weight of the secret and the reality of my new power settled heavily and gloriously upon me. The rest of that afternoon blurred into a dizzying seminar on high finance. I spent hours in Julian Vance's magnificent office, poring over stacks of trust agreements, property deeds, financial statements, and tax filings. They were all managed by teams of professionals, lawyers, accountants, and investment managers who had been working on my behalf for years without my knowledge. "Your grandfather was very specific about the timing, April," Julian explained, sensing my overwhelmed state. "He wanted you to experience what he called normal life, to understand the value of a hard day's work and the responsibilities of an ordinary budget before you understood your true financial position." "But why hide it?" I asked, pushing a massive quarterly report for the Las Vegas property across the desk. Why not just tell me? Why let my parents believe I was the one who got nothing? Julian's smile was sad but insightful, because he knew your family. He knew that if they understood your inheritance, they would treat you differently. They would either resent you, or they would try to control you, or they would only see you as a source of funds, never as a person. The memory of the will reading, the condescending laughter, the dismissive comments came rushing back. They had shown their true colors perfectly, exactly as Grandpa had predicted. They had dismissed my entire character based on the weight of an empty envelope. Your grandfather wanted you to see how they truly felt about you before you gained the power to change the dynamic, Julian continued, leaning back in his chair. He wanted you to be sure who truly cared about April, the teacher, versus who would care about April, the heiress. I felt a profound shift within me. This wasn't just a vast fortune. It was a deeply strategic, decades-long lesson in human nature, orchestrated by a man who loved me enough to protect my character more than my bank account. That evening, Julian arranged for me to tour one of my properties, the Monte Carlo Bay Resort. As the general manager, a polished man named Antoine Dubois, showed me through the magnificent complex, 300 luxury suites, a private beach, 5 world-class restaurants, and a bustling casino floor, I had to keep reminding myself, I am the owner. It was completely surreal. The property has maintained 94% occupancy for the past 3 years, Antoine explained proudly as we stood on the terrace of the presidential suite. Your trust has been an excellent owner, Miss Thompson. Very hands-off, but always supportive of quality improvements. I asked Antoine about market positioning and customer experience, echoing the questions Grandpa used to pose during our chess sessions. My grandfather managed this remotely through video conferences with your advisory team, right? I asked. Indeed, he was remarkably knowledgeable about hospitality operations for someone who never worked in the industry. But he had worked in the industry, I realized through me. All those conversations about what makes people feel welcome, about balancing luxury with comfort, about how a good teacher listens to her students. He'd been incorporating my ordinary, unimportant perspective into his extraordinary business strategies. My teaching background, my quiet observations of people, had been my practical education in his empire. Back in my 5-star suite that night, I checked my phone. The family group text was still buzzing. Blake had made an offer on a condo in Miami. Samantha was planning to quit her job and become a lifestyle influencer. They were celebrating their millions, completely oblivious to my billions. But what struck me was the understanding. Grandpa hadn't given them immediate gratification. He had given them the appearance of wealth while giving me something far more valuable, the chance to discover my own strength and capability. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad, William. How's the vacation going, honey? Hope you're not spending too much money. I looked around my presidential suite, at the harbor view that stretched to the horizon, at the complimentary bottle of rare champagne on the table. It was all worth more than his monthly car payment. It's educational, I texted back, savoring the ambiguity. The next morning, Julian arranged for the company jet, a sleek, mid-sized Gulfstream, to take me to Las Vegas. I was settling into the leather seat of an airplane I apparently owned when I realized I needed a clear strategy. I had 2 choices. I could go home immediately, reveal everything, and shock them with the truth, making them feel foolish for underestimating me. Or I could be strategic. I could use what Grandpa had taught me to think several moves ahead, to use the power of the secret. As the jet climbed into the sky above Monaco, I made my decision. I wasn't just going to shock them, I was going to teach them a lesson. A lesson in respect, foresight, and humility. It was time to stop being the invisible piece on the board. It was time to play chess. The family had made their moves. Now it was the Queen's turn. I was heading to Vegas to understand the full scope of my power before wielding it. The descent into Las Vegas was a sharp, dazzling contrast to the old-world glamour of Monaco. The Belmont Grand Casino and Resort, a monument of glass and gleaming gold, rose 47 floors from the Strip. My monument, apparently. At the airport, I was met by Sarah Chin, the Vegas property manager. She was sharp, professional, and completely unaware she was talking to her ultimate owner. The limousine she met me in, the kind of stretched luxury vehicle that would have made my brother Blake's jaw drop, whispered of true operational wealth, not just inherited assets. "Miss Thompson," Sarah said as we settled into the limo's leather seats. "Mr. Vance's firm requested a comprehensive tour. We're excited to show you what the team has built here. How long have you been managing the property?" I asked, keeping my tone casual the way Grandpa had taught me. Show interest, not ownership. 7 years now. It's been incredible watching it grow. The Thompson Global Trust has been the ideal owner, supportive of innovation, but incredibly smart about risk management. As we toured the resort, Sarah showed me financial reports that made the Monaco documents look like pocket change. The casino floor generated about 60% of the massive revenue, with the hotel, restaurants, and entertainment venues contributing the rest. Everything was meticulously managed, profitable, and growing. "The trust has been talking about expansion," Sarah mentioned as we sat in the penthouse suite, the one I own naturally. "There's serious interest in acquiring similar properties in Dubai and Singapore." "Really?" I tried to sound mildly curious. "What kind of timeline are we looking at for that?" "Nothing concrete yet, but the preliminary research is promising. Your financial team seems confident about international expansion." My financial team. The idea that I had a vast, unseen network of lawyers, accountants, and managers working for me was still mind-boggling. That afternoon, I spent 3 hours on video calls with the team, my CPA, who had filed my teacher's tax returns while maintaining the legal fiction, my investment manager, who had grown my portfolio from hundreds of millions to over $1 billion, and my legal counsel, who had structured everything to protect my privacy. "Miss Thompson," my lead advisor, David, explained, "your grandfather left very specific instructions about how to handle your financial awakening. He anticipated you might want to make some significant moves once you understood your position." "What kind of moves?" "He thought you might be interested in strategic acquisitions, particularly in markets where you have personal knowledge or family connections." Family connections. An idea, cold and brilliant, began to form in my mind. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah at the resort's signature steakhouse. As we ate food that cost more per bite than my old weekly grocery budget, I asked casual questions about business acquisitions. "Hypothetically," I said, swirling the expensive red wine in my glass, "if someone wanted to acquire a small, regional shipping company, maybe worth around $30 million, how would that work?" Sarah, sharp as a tack, raised an eyebrow. $30 million is effectively pocket change for a trust your size, April. We could structure that through existing corporate entities. Complete the acquisition within 30 days, maybe faster. Is this hypothetical shipping company interesting for some reason? I thought about Thompson Maritime, the business my dad, William, had just inherited. I'd grown up hearing about the company, the smell of the ocean, the massive containers, the complex logistics. I also knew, from overhearing stressful phone calls, that Dad had struggled with debt and expansion costs. His $40 million inheritance was the company plus the debt, not pure liquid cash. It might be, I said carefully, a regional market that needs stability, a good, ethical employer. Later that night, I called Julian Vance in Monaco. He listened thoughtfully as I outlined my plan. You want to acquire your father's company, April. I want to save it, I corrected him. Dad's been struggling with cash flow since the fleet expansion. He's too proud to ask for help. But if the right buyer came along with the right offer, an offer structured to clear his debt and stabilize the business, he would take it. And you think you are the right buyer? I think I'm the only buyer who actually cares whether the employees keep their jobs and whether the company maintains the culture Dad built with Grandpa. Besides, I added, the steel in my voice surprising even me, I know that business better than anyone, even Dad, because Grandpa used me as his sounding board for 20 years. Julian was quiet for a moment. April, this would be your first major business decision as a billionaire. Are you certain you want it to involve your family? My family doesn't know it involves me, I said. To them, it would just be a generous offer from anonymous foreign investors. A legitimate, life-changing windfall. And you are comfortable with that deception? With keeping the secret even as you execute this strategic move? I thought back to their faces, the scorn, the laughter, the casual dismissal of my intelligence and my worth. For now, Julian, I said, looking out at the glittering, excessive world that was Las Vegas. Yes, I'm comfortable with that deception. It's time they understood the cost of underestimation. The next morning, I flew back to Portland, armed with a plan. I was giving my family one more chance to see me as I truly was. If they continued to underestimate me, I would show them exactly what it cost when the quiet one finally decided to play. Returning to my small apartment in Portland felt like stepping back into a costume. One day, I was reviewing the annual returns of a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. The next, I was organizing files for my fourth grade class, still living the quiet life of a school teacher. The contrast was almost surreal. But I wasn't just April the teacher anymore. I was April the operative, operating behind enemy lines, my own family's dining room table. The family group chat was still buzzing with superficial excitement. Blake was arguing with Samantha over whose inheritance was more liquid. Dad was focused entirely on his new status as a $40 million man, trying to look like a savvy investor while reading finance news he clearly didn't understand. They were all so focused on the gift, they failed to see the game. I, meanwhile, spent my mornings on video calls with my Dubai acquisition team, discussing the purchase of a resort that would cost more than my entire family's combined wealth. And in the afternoons, I worked with Sarah Chen and Julian Vance to finalize the acquisition offer for Thompson Maritime. The research was, as predicted, troubling. Dad's company was more vulnerable than he let on. He had taken on significant debt for the fleet expansion that Grandpa had only half completed. And while the business was profitable on paper, it was cash poor and massively over-leveraged. A determined buyer, say, a billionaire who knew exactly where the company's financial choke points were, could force a sale quite easily. My phone buzzed with an encrypted text from Sarah in Vegas. Thompson Maritime Analysis complete. Business is exactly as described. Financially stressed. Our offer will solve their immediate cash flow problems while giving TGT Thompson Global Trust a solid regional shipping operation. Preliminary offer drafted. What's the timeline? I texted back. Present offer Monday morning. Anonymous, of course. Through Neptune International Holdings. one of our existing shell companies. Clean transaction, generous terms, no obvious connection to you. They can't afford to refuse the capital injection. The logistics were perfect. It was a hostile takeover wrapped in a life preserver. My mother, Eleanor, called that afternoon. April, honey, we're having a family dinner on Thursday. Your father needs to start organizing his new financial planning, and you're so good with spreadsheets. Bring your laptop and help us with the administrative work, all right? You can help us track all the expenses we'll have with the Napa estate. I almost laughed. They were asking me, the woman who owned the Monte Carlo casino, to organize their retirement portfolio. Of course, Mom, I replied cheerfully. I'd be happy to help with your basic administrative needs. As I drove to their house on Thursday evening, I carried my laptop bag not filled with a spreadsheet for tracking wine cellar inventory, but with the preliminary acquisition offer and detailed financial analysis of my father's company. The entire family was already there. Blake was scrolling through luxury car websites on his tablet. Samantha was showing Mom photos of hideous renovation ideas for the Martha's vineyard home. Dad was reading business news, trying to look like the CEO he was, instead of the financially distressed CEO he was. April, Samantha called out, there's our little world traveler. How was Monaco? Did you take lots of pictures? It was educational, I repeated, settling into my usual spot at the dining room table. I still can't believe you actually went, Blake muttered, barely looking up. That place is for people with serious money. Must have been awkward being around all those millionaires. You adapt, I replied mildly, meeting his eye for a moment. He quickly looked away, back to his screen. Dad raised his wine glass. Let's toast to George's legacy. He certainly provided well for the family. Everyone raised their glasses, celebrating inheritances that were a fraction of what I controlled. I just sat there, hands folded, watching them. April, your glass, Mom prompted, slightly annoyed. I'm fine, thanks, I said. Someone should stay clear-headed for the administrative work. Dad nodded, approving my practicality. During dessert, Dad started talking about the business. Thompson Maritime is doing well. George's investment in new vessels really positioned us for growth. We're looking at expanding routes, maybe acquiring smaller competitors. How's the cash flow situation? I asked, leaning forward slightly, the question slipping out so naturally that only Dad noticed the sharpness of it. He looked surprised that I'd asked a business question. Well, it's manageable. We've got some debt from the expansion, but the revenue projections look good. What about working capital? Reserve funds for unexpected expenses. Now, everyone was staring at me. April, Mom said with a laugh, trying to dismiss the tension. You don't need to worry about business details. That's your father's expertise. I'm just curious, I replied, not backing down. Grandpa always said cash flow was the most important metric for any business. We're fine, Dad insisted, though I noticed the muscle in his jaw tighten. I knew they weren't fine. I had the balance sheets in my laptop bag. They were surviving month to month. One major client loss away from serious trouble. After dinner, as I helped Mom clear the dishes in the kitchen, she pulled me aside. Honey, I know you're trying to be involved, but you don't need to ask your father difficult questions about his business. It's not really your area. I nearly dropped the wine glass I was drying. Not my area. I owned businesses that generated more profit in a single month than Dad's company made in a year. Of course, Mom, I said, keeping my face neutral. I was just making conversation. I know, sweetie, but leave the business talk to the business people, okay? As I drove home that night, I didn't feel guilt. I felt vindication. I called my acquisition team. Present the Neptune International Holdings offer Monday morning. Generous terms, fast timeline, all cash. And if they have questions about the buyer, tell them the European investors prefer to maintain privacy, but are very interested in supporting American maritime businesses. It wasn't a lie. It was just an incomplete truth, served up exactly as they had served up their truth about me. The time for the quiet joke was over. The time for the billion-dollar surprise was now. The offer arrived on a Tuesday morning, not Monday as planned, but the effect was the same. Immediate shock and disruption. Dad called me at school during my 10-minute morning break. His voice was strained, tight with a stress I had only ever heard in the background of his phone calls. April, something unexpected happened with the company. We received a buyout offer this morning from some international investment group, Neptune International Holdings, completely out of nowhere. I put on my most concerned, slightly naive voice. Oh, Dad, is that good or bad? I don't know. It's a really good offer. Almost too good. I could hear papers shuffling loudly on his end. They're offering $45 million. That's 30% above the company's book value. But I don't understand why they want us. We're not that big in the grand scheme of things. What does your lawyer say? I asked, pacing the empty classroom. That's the thing. They want an answer by Friday. Professional investors don't usually work with such tight timelines unless they're very serious. Well, maybe they see potential you don't see, I suggested innocently. Maybe look, can you come to dinner Thursday? I want the whole family to discuss this together. You've always been good with details, and I could use another perspective. Another perspective. If only he knew whose perspective he was really asking for, the person who drafted the offer. Thursday's dinner was entirely different from the previous week. The celebratory mood was gone, replaced by focused, almost tense energy. Dad had spread financial documents across the dining room table like he was planning a military campaign, not a retirement. The offer is $45 million, Dad announced as we gathered. That's, as I said, 30% above the book value. It solves every single cash flow problem we've been having. Blake finally looked up from his tablet, actually paying attention. $45 million? That's crazy, Dad. Take it. You're done. You can retire. It's not that simple, son, Dad replied, rubbing his temples. If I sell the company, what do I do then? It's been my life for 30 years. I'm 58. Too young to retire, too old to start over in a new industry. Samantha chimed in, You travel, Dad. You and Mom can finally enjoy the Napa estate. I sat quietly observing. Dad wanted someone to tell him not to sell, to validate his emotional attachment. But the logical part of his brain knew the offer was a necessary life preserver. I picked up the offer documents and read through the detailed terms, making sure my expression showed appropriate, careful concern, rather than the satisfaction I truly felt. The terms were exactly what I had instructed, generous enough to tempt them, structured to solve their core financial issues, but not so excessive as to raise suspicions. Who is this company? I asked, pointing to the letterhead. Neptune International Holdings, Dad said. Swiss-based investment firm. Very legitimate, according to our research. They specialize in maritime and logistics acquisitions. What's their timeline for integration? Employee retention policies? What about management structure changes? I continued, reading through the fine print I had dictated to Julian Vance's team. Everyone stared at me again. April, Mom said slowly, her voice laced with confusion. Those are very specific questions for someone who doesn't work in business. Grandpa always talked about reading the fine print, I replied, not looking up from the documents. These terms are actually quite good. They're offering to retain all current employees for at least 3 years, maintain the current management structure, and preserve operational independence. That's rare in a hostile acquisition. How do you know what constitutes good terms? Blake asked, his voice thick with suspicion. I shrugged. I read financial news sometimes. Business strategy is interesting when you think about it analytically. Dad was studying me with an entirely new expression. Not disdain, but genuine curiosity. April, you're asking better questions than my business attorney did. Maybe I inherited more of Grandpa's business sense than anyone realized, I murmured, a deliberate challenge hanging in the air. The conversation continued for another hour, but I could see Dad's resolve wavering. He was tired of the stress. He wanted out. I think I have to accept, he said finally, resting his hands on the papers. It's too much money to pass up, and honestly, the stress of managing cash flow has been keeping me awake at night. The offer expires tomorrow at 5 p.m. After dinner, I lingered in the kitchen, helping Mom with dishes. Your father seems relieved, Mom observed. I think the business was more stressful than he let on. Sometimes selling at the right time is the smartest business decision, I replied, carefully drying a wine glass. You were very insightful tonight, April. Very mature business thinking. Maybe you should consider a career change, eventually. I nearly dropped the glass. This from the woman who had laughed at my inheritance 2 weeks ago. You think I could work in business? Well, not immediately, but maybe someday. You've always been smart, April. Maybe too smart for elementary education. I'll think about it, Mom, I said neutrally. The next day, Friday, at 4:47 p.m., Dad signed the papers. By 5:15 p.m., he owned $45 million in liquid funds. And by 5:30 p.m., I, April Thompson, owned the company my father had just sold. I celebrated quietly in my apartment, watching the sunset, knowing that the most critical move of the game had been executed. The Invisible Queen had just taken the king's castle. The transaction was smooth and silent. Sarah Chun confirmed from Vegas. Thompson Maritime was officially a subsidiary of Neptune International Holdings, which was entirely controlled by my Thompson Global Trust. I kept everything exactly as is. Same employees, same management, same operations. Dad didn't need to know who the ultimate buyer was. Not yet. My focus immediately shifted to phase 2, the public statement. I want to buy a house, Julian, I told him during a call that weekend. A significant house. The biggest, most impressive house in Portland. Something that makes people ask questions. Julian chuckled. Feeling ready to raise your profile, April? I'm feeling ready to stop hiding. That afternoon, I contacted Patricia Wells, Portland's top luxury real estate agent. When I told her my budget range, upwards of $15 million, her entire professional demeanor shifted into laser-focused intensity. Miss Thompson, she asked, trying to casually probe, may I ask what line of work you're in? International business, real estate, and hospitality investments. We spent the afternoon touring property after property, each one more extravagant than the last. I saw $10 million estates with home theaters and wine cellars and $12 million mansions with guest houses larger than my parents' entire home. Finally, we pulled up to a massive property behind imposing stone walls. "This," Patricia said, her voice reverent, "is the Westfield estate, $18 million. The location and views are absolutely unparalleled." The house was stunning, situated on 20 acres, overlooking the entire city. It was the kind of property that appeared in architectural magazines. But as we toured the grounds, I realized the true selling point. From the massive, curved window of the master bedroom, you could see my parents' entire neighborhood far below. "Perfect," I said, turning to Patricia. "I'll take it." Patricia nearly dropped her tablet. "I'm sorry, the Westfield estate? You want to make an offer?" "I want to make a cash purchase. Full asking price. Close within 2 weeks." "Miss Thompson, this is an $18 million property. Don't you want to think about it? Review comparable sales? Discuss financing?" "I can count," I said simply. I pulled out my phone and called David, my financial advisor. "David, I need you to wire $18 million for a real estate purchase. I'll send you the details now." As I gave David the wire instructions, Patricia stood there, slack-jawed, watching the entire transaction unfold in 5 minutes. I could practically see her recalculating everything she thought she knew about me. After I hung up, she finally found her voice. "Miss Thompson, may I ask, what exactly do you own in international business?" "I own things," I said, meeting her gaze. "Hotels, casinos, shipping companies, that sort of thing." That evening, I had dinner with my parents in their modest kitchen, while my phone confirmed the wire transfer for the most expensive house in Portland. "How was your day, honey?" Mom asked. "Productive," I said. "I looked at some real estate options." "Oh, thinking of upgrading from your apartment?" "Something like that." Dad, still reading business news on his tablet, commented, "You know what's interesting? The firm that bought Thompson Maritime has been acquiring shipping companies all along the West Coast. This wasn't a random purchase. It was part of a larger consolidation strategy." I kept my expression neutral. Maybe they see opportunities in the maritime industry that others are missing. Maybe. But it makes me wonder if I sold too cheaply. If they're building a regional network, maybe my company was worth more than I thought. "You got an excellent price, Dad," I insisted. "Don't second-guess a good business decision." "I suppose," he sighed. "It's just, your grandfather always said consolidation was inevitable in shipping. Maybe these foreign investors are the ones making it happen." If only he knew that his father's granddaughter was the foreign investor. My phone buzzed. Wire received. "Congratulations on your new estate." I smiled and put my phone away. The quiet life was over. It was time to stop being invisible. Moving day arrived exactly 2 weeks later. I hired the most expensive, discreet moving company in Portland. As the massive trucks pulled up to the stone gates of the Westfield estate, I called Mom. "I'm moving today." "Oh, that's nice, honey. Did you find a bigger apartment?" "Something like that. You should come see it." I gave her the Westfield estate address, hung up, and waited. I was standing in the grand foyer, directing the placement of a piece of abstract sculpture, when my phone rang. "April!" Dad's voice was strange, tight, confused. "Did you give your mother the wrong address?" "No." "Why?" "Because she's standing in front of the Westfield estate. You know, the $18 million mansion that just sold to some mystery buyer." I smiled at my reflection in the enormous front window. "I'm not in front of it, Dad. I'm in it." Silence. "April, that's not funny." "I'm not joking." More silence. We're coming up the driveway. I watched from the foyer as their modest sedan pulled up behind the moving truck. Through the tall windows, I could see them sitting in their car, staring at the house like it might disappear if they moved too quickly. When they finally got out, they approached the front door like people walking into a dream. I opened it and waited. "April!" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "Hi, Mom." "Dad, welcome to my new home." They stepped inside slowly, their eyes sweeping over the marble floors, the crystal chandelier, and the staircase that curved up to the second floor like something from a palace. The game had just moved to the final, spectacular square. My parents, William and Eleanor, moved through my new house like ghosts. Their faces, usually composed and confident, were a strange mixture of shock, confusion, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. The sheer scale of the house, rooms larger than their entire first floor, a professional chef's kitchen, a library with floor-to-ceiling windows, was physically overwhelming to them. "April!" Dad said, his voice quiet but intense as we stood in the master bedroom, looking out at the sprawling view that included their distant neighborhood. "You need to explain this right now. Explain how you bought this house, where the money came from, what is really going on." I walked to the window, the city spread out below us, and looked down. From up here, their problems and their small-minded assumptions seemed very, very small. "Remember Grandpa's envelope?" I asked. "The letter April," Dad scoffed, his businessman instincts finally kicking in to override the shock. "There's no way a letter explains this house." It wasn't just a letter. It was a plane ticket to Monaco, and notification that my trust had been activated. They stared at me blankly. "Grandpa established a blind trust for me when I was 16, I explained, my voice calm, the emotional turmoil of the last few weeks settling into cold, hard clarity. "I've been a billionaire since my 26th birthday, which was last month." Dad sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. "That's impossible." "Grandpa quietly bought properties around the world and put them in my name through the Thompson Global Trust. I own casinos in Monaco and Las Vegas, hotels in London and Singapore, commercial real estate across 3 continents. The envelope you all laughed at? It made me rich enough to buy anything I want." "A billionaire," Mom whispered, finally registering the word. $1.35 billion, actually, as of yesterday's market close. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Finally, Dad found his voice, a strange blend of anger and dawning opportunity. "If this is true, April, if you really have that kind of money, then why didn't you tell us?" I almost laughed. "Tell you when?" "During the will reading, when you were all laughing at my envelope, when Mom made that cruel comment about Grandpa not loving me, when you asked me to help with basic administrative work because I was good with computers." "We didn't mean," Mom started. "Yes, you did," I cut in, my voice remaining calm but firm. "You meant every word. You thought I was the leftover, the one who didn't matter, the one who got nothing while everyone else got millions. And Grandpa made sure you had that opportunity to show me exactly who you were before I had the power to change the dynamic." Dad stood up, his business persona fully engaged. "Okay, let's discuss this rationally. If you have this kind of wealth, there are family considerations, tax implications, trust structures. We should talk about how to handle this responsibly." And there it was, the real reason for their sudden concern, the shift from daughter to asset. "Actually, Dad, there is something we should discuss," I said. I pulled out my phone and opened an email. "I acquired something recently that you might find interesting." "What?" "Thompson Maritime." His face went utterly pale. "What are you talking about?" Neptune International Holdings, the foreign investment firm that bought your company last week. That's my shell company. I bought your shipping business. He stumbled back a step. You bought my company. For $45 million, which was quite generous, considering the debt load and cash flow issues. Why? Because I could, and because I wanted to. Because you sold it without even wondering if anyone in the family might be interested in keeping it. April, Mom said desperately, her voice rising. This is insane. You can't just buy your father's company. I can, and I did. It's mine now. Completely. Dad's expression cycled rapidly through shock, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. Give it back, he said finally, his voice shaking. The company. Sell it back to me. I shook my head slowly. It's not for sale. April, that company is my life's work. It was your life's work. Now it's my business investment. I walked toward the door of the bedroom. I think you should both go home and process this. We can talk more when you're ready to have a real conversation. We're not leaving until you explain how you're going to fix this. Dad yelled, desperation finally breaking his composure. Fix what? I turned back to them. I bought a company from a willing seller at an above-market price. I moved into a house I paid cash for. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. April, Dad pleaded, the businessman gone, replaced by the broken father. Please. For a moment, I felt that flicker of the old April, the one who hated conflict. But then I remembered the laughter, the dismissal, the assumption of my worthlessness. I'll see you both soon, I said gently, when you're ready to treat me like family instead of like hired help. After they left, I stood alone in my magnificent new house. The silence was immense. My phone was buzzing with congratulations and business updates. But for the first time since opening Grandpa's envelope, I felt completely, perfectly alone. And surprisingly, that felt exactly right. I had won the game, but I hadn't won my family yet. The next move was theirs. The next 72 hours were defined by silence, followed by a sudden, frantic onslaught. My brother Blake called first, 3 days after the confrontation, his voice tight with anger and panic. What the hell is going on, April? Good morning to you too, Blake. I was sitting on the terrace, drinking coffee that cost more per pound than his favorite watch, looking out over the city I now partially owned. Don't play dumb. Mom and Dad told me everything. The house, the companies, you buying Dad's business. Is any of it true? Which part are you asking about? All of it. Are you really some secret billionaire? I'm not secret anymore. This is insane. How is this even possible? Grandpa left you an envelope, just like the rest of us saw. He left me an empire, Blake. The envelope was just the notification. There was a long, stunned pause on the line. April, we need to have a family meeting. All of us. Tonight. We had a family meeting, I reminded him, my voice flat. It was called the will reading, remember? When you all thought my inheritance was hilarious. That was before you knew I had money. Look, we're family. Are we? Because for 26 years, family meant you got the spotlight and I got ignored. What's changed, Blake? Besides my net worth. Everything's changed. You can't just buy Dad's company and move into some mansion and expect us to what? To treat me with respect, I finished for him. To include me in decisions. To stop assuming I'm worthless. I set down my coffee cup, the clink echoing in the silence. I'm not expecting anything from you anymore, Blake. I've learned not to. Fine. You want to play hardball? I'll call our lawyers. If Grandpa left you all this money through some kind of fraud or elder abuse, we'll expose it. I genuinely laughed, a cold, sharp sound. Blake, I have the best legal team money can buy. They structured this for 10 years, specifically to withstand scrutiny. Do you really want to spend the next 5 years of your $40 million inheritance on court battles you can't afford to win? He hung up without another word. An hour later, Samantha called. Then Mom. Then Dad. All variations on the same theme. Shock, anger, demands for explanations, threats of legal action, and finally begrudging requests for a family intervention. I ignored them all and spent the afternoon touring commercial real estate with Patricia. If I was going to live in Portland permanently, I might as well make some local investments. That evening, I was in my newly stocked wine cellar when the security system chimed. The front gate camera showed all 4 of them, Mom, Dad, Blake, and Samantha, standing at the entrance like some kind of awkward, poorly planned intervention squad. I pressed the intercom button. Can I help you? April, it's your family. Mom's voice came through the speaker, tight with indignation. We need to talk. Did you make an appointment? April, don't be ridiculous. We're your family. The family that laughed at me, dismissed me, and threatened me with lawsuits today? That family. Please. Dad's voice came through now, softer, more desperate. Let us in. We can work this out. I considered it. Part of me, the old part that had always craved their approval, wanted to open the gates and try to fix everything. But the new part, the one that had learned its own worth in the casinos of Monaco and the boardrooms of Vegas, knew better. I'll make you a deal, I said finally. You can come in. But we do this my way. You listen without interrupting. You don't make demands. You don't threaten me. And you acknowledge that everything I own legitimately through a trust my grandfather established. Silence. I could hear them whispering on the other end. Then Dad's voice. Okay, April. Your way. I opened the gates and waited in the grand foyer. When they walked through my front door, I led them directly to the living room, where the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning, dominant view of the city. I took the chair that faced them all, while they arranged themselves on the massive sofa like defendants waiting for judgment. So I said, crossing my legs, what did you want to discuss? Dad cleared his throat. April, we owe you an apology. For what specifically? He hesitated. For not understanding the situation with your inheritance. For not realizing what George had done for you. That's not what you need to apologize for. What do you mean? You're apologizing for being wrong about my inheritance. You're not apologizing for treating me badly. Mom leaned forward, a flicker of the old entitlement in her eyes. Honey, we never treated you badly. We love you. Do you? I looked at each of them, because love isn't what I felt during that reading. Love isn't asking me to do administrative work while you planned how to spend millions. Love isn't laughing when someone suggests that Grandpa didn't care about me. You assumed I was less important, less capable, less deserving. And that is what you need to address. The room was silent again, the tension almost unbearable. They had to choose, maintain their pride, or begin to earn back the relationship. I had given them the terms of surrender. Now, they had to decide if the cost of their arrogance was worth $1 billion family tie. The silence in my vast living room was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The city lights twinkled below us, indifferent to the high-stakes family drama unfolding in the mansion above. My family, arranged awkwardly on the silk sofa, looked like the weight of the world, or at least the weight of $1 billion, had settled on their shoulders. Samantha finally broke the quiet. We were shocked, April. We didn't handle it well. It was a reaction. A reaction you always have when it comes to me, I corrected her gently. You handled it exactly how you always handle things involving me. You assumed I was irrelevant. Blake, who had been quiet, finally spoke up, a surprising lack of aggression in his tone. Okay, fine. We screwed up. We're sorry. But April, you bought Dad's company. That's not normal family behavior. Normal family behavior would have been asking if I wanted to be involved before selling it to strangers, I countered. Normal family behavior would have been treating me like I mattered. So you're right, Blake. This isn't normal family behavior. This is business. This is me taking control of the narrative that you all wrote for me. Dad, his eyes fixed on the distant lights, finally spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. So this is revenge, April? No, I said, standing up and walking toward the window. This is business, and this is self-respect. I bought a profitable company from a willing seller at a fair price. I moved into a house I could afford. I am living my life on my terms for the first time ever. What do you want from me? Mom asked, her voice small. We want to be a family again. I turned back to face them. I want you to understand that April, the overlooked granddaughter, doesn't exist anymore. April, the billionaire businesswoman, does. And she doesn't need your approval, your permission, or your acceptance. April, Dad said desperately, his emotional plea cutting through the business talk. I need that company back. It's my legacy, everything I've worked for. Then you shouldn't have sold it. I didn't know you were interested. You never asked, I stated simply. The point was made. There was one final long pause. The power dynamic had shifted permanently and irreversibly. They knew it. They just hadn't accepted the cost. There is one thing, I said, finally offering a term of peace, a genuine path toward reconciliation. They all looked up hopefully. I want a public acknowledgement, all of you, for the way you treated me at the will reading, for the assumptions you made, and for the disrespect you showed. A public acknowledgement. Samantha asked, horrified. Social media posts? A local newspaper ad? If necessary, wherever you announced your own inheritances and talked about your windfalls, I want you to acknowledge that you were wrong about mine, that you misjudged my grandfather's plan and you misjudged me. That's humiliating, Blake muttered. Good. Now you know how I felt. And if we do this, Dad asked carefully, the businessman reappearing through the cracks of the father, will you consider selling me back the company? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'll consider it. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even a maybe. But it was hope, and sometimes hope is the most powerful currency of all. They looked at each other, weighing the humiliation against the billion-dollar connection. They were realizing that Grandpa's last chess move had been to force them to acknowledge me, not just tolerate me. He had used his money to buy me respect. A week later, the public acknowledgments began appearing. Dad's was in the business section of the Oregonian. William Thompson acknowledges that he significantly underestimated his daughter April's business acumen and inheritance. Miss Thompson has proven herself to be a sophisticated investor and businesswoman, and I deeply regret any dismissive comments I may have made about her capabilities. Mom's Facebook post was more personal, but equally public. I want to apologize to my daughter April for comments I made that suggested her grandfather didn't care about her. I was completely wrong, and I'm sorry for any pain my words caused. April is an accomplished businesswoman who deserves respect and recognition. Blake and Samantha's Instagram posts were briefer, but no less satisfying acknowledgments that they had misjudged me. The public attention was immediate and immense. Local business journalists started asking questions about the mysterious April Thompson who had suddenly emerged as a major player in Portland. As for Thompson Maritime, I surprised everyone by keeping Dad on as general manager. Same office, same responsibilities, same day-to-day operations. The only difference was that he now reported to a management company that reported to a holding company that was ultimately controlled by me. The ultimate irony was not lost on either of us, but it was the start of a new, more honest relationship. Grandpa's plan was working. It had been worth every painful moment. 6 months passed, and the transformation in my life and in my family dynamics was profound. My days were no longer spent grading papers, but conducting board meetings for my Singapore resort or negotiating commercial leases in London. My net worth was nearing $1.5 billion, but the real change was internal. I was confident, decisive, and fully inhabiting the role Grandpa George had prepared me for. The family gatherings, which I had reluctantly agreed to resume monthly at my parents' house, were almost unrecognizable. The atmosphere was different, respectful, careful, but also more honest than it had been in years. The forced performances were gone. During dessert one evening, Dad, William, looked up from his plate. He seemed lighter, less burdened. "April," he said, "I have something to tell you about the company." I looked up from my wine glass. "What about it?" "The new ownership structure. It's actually been incredible. Having access to capital, being part of a larger, global shipping network. Thompson Global Trust has given us routes and opportunities we never could have accessed before. Not having to worry about debt service has let me focus on what I do best: logistics and operations. The employees seem happier, too. They are, I observed. Job security, better benefits, clear growth opportunities. Good management always yields results." "I should have sold years ago," Dad admitted, his voice quiet, but I was too proud to admit I was in over my head. Mom, Eleanor, who had been watching this exchange intently, set down her wine glass. "April, can I ask you something I've been wondering about for months?" "Of course. When you bought the company, did you do it to hurt your father or to help him?" I considered the question carefully, both honestly. I wanted him to understand what it felt like to have important decisions made without his input. But I also couldn't stand the thought of all those loyal employees losing their jobs if the company failed. And now it's just business. Good business, as it turns out. Samantha leaned forward. "So, you're grateful we treated you badly?" "I'm grateful for the journey it started," I corrected her. "Grandpa could have just left me the money directly, but instead he gave me something much more valuable, the chance to discover who I really was before the money changed how people saw me. Your dismissal forced me to find my own strength." Blake, who had been quieter than usual all evening, finally spoke up, a hesitant look in his eyes. "April, I need to tell you something. I've never been happier. Earning that first paycheck, knowing I actually contributed to the company's success, it's a better feeling than any vintage car." Dad leaned forward. "April, I need you to know something. I'm proud of you, not because of the money or the success, but because of who you've become. You're stronger than I ever was, smarter than I ever realized, and kinder than I deserved." "Thank you, Dad." "No, thank you. Your grandfather saw something in you that the rest of us missed. He was right to trust you with his legacy. You needed to learn your own worth before anyone else could see it. Later that night, as I drove home to my estate, I called Julian Vance. How are you feeling about your new family dynamic? Different. Better, I think. More honest, certainly, I replied, pulling into my circular driveway. The house, which had once felt like a symbol of defiance, now felt like home. And personally, April, are you happy with the choices you've made? I'm proud of who I've become, I said. 6 months ago, I was invisible. Now I'm exactly who I was always meant to be. I think Grandpa would be proud, too. He'd especially appreciate the chess metaphor. Sometimes you have to sacrifice pieces to win the game. And have you won? I looked at my reflection in the rear-view mirror. The same face, but stronger, more confident, more genuinely myself than I'd ever been. I've won something better than the game, I said. I've won myself. The true victory wasn't the billions. It was the ability to stand in my own power, and in doing so, to finally bring my family back to a table built on respect and truth. The chapter of conflict was closing, and the chapter of consequence and legacy was beginning. 1 year later, I stood on the deck of my yacht, the Legacy, watching the Portland skyline glide by as we cruised down the Columbia River. The boat wasn't the largest in the marina, but it was perfect for what I needed. A place to entertain business associates, host family gatherings, and sometimes just escape from the complexity of managing a multi-billion-dollar empire. The past year had been transformative in ways I never could have imagined. The public acknowledgments from my family had ironically opened doors in the Portland business community. I now owned a controlling interest in the city's largest hotel chain, 3 residential developments, and a technology company specializing in maritime logistics. My net worth had grown to almost $2 billion. More importantly, I had grown into a businesswoman and philanthropist I genuinely respected. That evening, I hosted dinner with the entire family at the Westfield estate. It had become a monthly tradition, gatherings where we actually talked to each other instead of performing for each other. How are things at the shipping company, Dad? I asked across the magnificent dining room table. Incredible, he beamed. The integration with your other maritime holdings has opened up routes we never could have accessed before. We're actually bidding on some international contracts that would have been impossible under the old structure. The employees are happy, secure. They know they're part of something bigger now. Mom set down her wine glass and looked at me thoughtfully. April, do you forgive us? Really forgive us? Not just tolerate us because we're family. I considered the question carefully. I've accepted who you are, and I understand why you acted the way you did. You weren't malicious. You were just blind to possibilities you'd never considered. That's not really a question of forgiveness. Your dismissal forced me to find my own strength. Your assumptions helped me discover my own worth. If you'd seen my potential from the beginning, I might never have learned to see it myself. Samantha leaned forward. So, you're grateful we treated you badly? I'm grateful for the journey it started. I corrected her. Grandpa could have just left me the money directly, but instead he gave me something much more valuable, the chance to discover who I really was before the money changed how people saw me. Your dismissal forced me to find my own strength. Blake, who had been working in the mail room of my London real estate firm for 3 months now, spoke up, his face thinner and more focused. April, I need to tell you something. I've never been happier, earning that first paycheck, knowing I actually contributed to the company's success. It's a better feeling than any vintage car. Dad leaned forward. April, I need you to know something. I'm proud of you, not because of the money or the success, but because of who you've become. You're stronger than I ever was, smarter than I ever realized, and kinder than I deserved. Thank you, Dad. No, thank you. Your grandfather saw something in you that the rest of us missed. He was right to trust you with his legacy. You needed to learn your own worth before anyone else could see it. Later that night, I sat in my home office, reviewing reports. My phone chimed with an email from the director of my charitable foundation. The George Thompson Foundation for Educational Excellence had just announced its largest grant yet, $100 million to support STEM education in underfunded schools across the Pacific Northwest. Tomorrow's news would feature photos of me presenting the grant check, standing alongside teachers and administrators who understood that education could change everything for a child who felt overlooked. I opened my laptop and began composing the foundation's press release. At the bottom, I added a personal note. My grandfather taught me that the greatest gifts often come in unexpected packages. Today, we're passing that lesson forward to the next generation of dreamers and achievers. As I typed those words, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice. Sometimes the most overlooked person in a room is the one with the most potential to change everything. He'd been right as always. I had spent 26 years being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked. But that experience had taught me something invaluable. True worth isn't determined by how others see you. It's determined by how you see yourself. Everything else is just details. The money was life-changing, but the real transformation had been learning to value myself. I hope they learn what I learned, that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the knowledge of your own capabilities. So, let me ask you, what is the greatest piece of advice or the most valuable lesson an older person in your life ever gave you that didn't involve money? Thank you for joining me on my journey from invisible teacher to unexpected CEO. I hope my story reminds you that the power to change everything is already within you.